I'm here to talk to you about education and making education work. So what does that mean, making education work? And I think everybody may interpret that topic slightly differently. It's a massive topic. So if you think about the PISA studies undertaken by the OECD, you could think 2018, the UK, out of 60, we were 22nd in reading ability of 15-year-olds. And we came 27 in maths. So some may think, it does kind of work, we are in the top 50%, so we are not doing that bad. Others may think, but there are a lot of nations which do better. So why are we where we are? But is maths and English really all? Is that all there is to say about the education system and to judge whether the system works or whether it doesn't? A lot of studies have shown that there's much more to it and that there are massive skills gaps when you look at the future workforce. Artificial intelligence is changing our jobs every day, and we've never had such a fast-moving environment in the job market. Jobs that exist today didn't exist yesterday, and probably by the time I leave this building today, there will be jobs created which haven't been there before. That relates to skills. For new jobs, we will need new skills, but how is the education system equipped today to actually deliver those skills, to help people equip young people with skills we need in the job market of tomorrow? Especially in this area and across the UK, STEM skills are of big importance. Here more so than elsewhere. But funnily enough, STEM teachers are one of the big skill shortages we are facing, not only in this area, but across the UK. So what do we do about it? What does the education system do about it? To actually help us equip the system with the right skill sets, to help our young people get the right skills to move forward. There have been changes over the past couple of years where the education has actually identified that there is a need to bring those two worlds closer, to help the education system to learn about what is there out there, what do we need, how do we need to equip our students. But let me take you through a little bit of a journey to make you see what is the role of the organization and what is our responsibility to help the system to make those changes. So let's look at the accountability system of schools. What are our schools measured at, and what is really at the core of their accountability towards the Department of Education and towards anybody talking about the system? It's exam results. Last week I've been to a post-16 evening and a preparation evening for the current year 11 students at one of the schools in this area. And the single one conversation and message they have sent to their students and they have sent to their parents is, you have to work hard, this is your year, this is the grades you need to get. It's all about the grades, it's all about the performance, and if you don't get the grades you could get and you could achieve, then you will walk out here and you will regret. It was a half-an-hour talk about grades and the performance on grades and the exam results, which are ultimately the most important thing for students. But why is that? Why does the education system only concentrate on grades? Well, it's because it determines their league tables. League tables determine how many students apply for that particular school. Would you send your child into a school that has below average exam results, but maybe focuses their strengths on other skill sets and other development areas? Maybe you wouldn't, because we are looking at, and even we do look at exam results, don't we? School subscription, student subscriptions on schools then determines funding for schools. So they're really, really eager and driven to get as many students signed up to their enrollment, because that will determine the funding they will receive. Ofsted is judging schools by the academic performance. Still now, exam results are a main driver in Ofsted. So schools' sole driver are exam results. How can I get the best possible outcome for my students and for my school when it comes down to exams? It is the human nature of us that's what we focus on. If you're measured on a key performance measure, then this is what we will focus on mostly. Yet, it's quite interesting to understand that actually some of the exam results, there's a massive impact on the socioeconomic status of students. So it's not all about the performance of the school individually. So schools in areas where you have a higher socioeconomic distribution will perform better than those of more disadvantaged areas. And quite interestingly, if you look at Cambridge, we are one of the most divided cities in the UK when it comes down to socioeconomic dispersion. And exams do not actually assess the skills we need to be successful in the future life at work. So what does that tell us about curriculum? So if exams are that important, how do schools focus on curriculum? And how did the curriculum change over the last couple of years? We had a period where schools started to think about how can we teach skills, how can we teach problem-solving skills, and how can we teach some of that team-working skills we so desperately need in the workplace. Having said that, over the last 2 years, curriculum yet again has changed, and curriculum teaching has refocused on reciting rather than problem-solving. Teachers tell us more and more frequently they do not have the time to allow students to work in teams. They really have to get ready. They prepare them for the exams to the point that they have to learn things out by heart. They do not take the time to bring them together and actually set them challenges to really kind of work on their social and soft skills which are needed. So to some extent, businesses on the one hand tell us we really need the workforce to be able to tackle problems, to find their own individual ways of dealing with these things. And at the same time, we're talking to schools and the education system, and they tell us we don't have time to do that. So where's the role? Who can support that? So then the question is, how do schools help young people to prepare for the world of work? There are some initiatives. The Department of Education and Ofsted has actually now recognized that enforcing schools to work with businesses and to actually concentrate on careers is getting more and more important. So they recognize that if they don't do anything about careers education, the gap between the need on businesses and organizations and the education system will become bigger and bigger. So Ofsted is now assessing schools on their career education program. For some schools and for many schools still this is just a tick box exercise. They think, okay, if I get a couple of businesses in, I tick the box, I can demonstrate that we've done something on careers, but that's it. Having said that, it is a massive success that they start to actually access it, because those schools who have been totally reluctant to actually even consider career education in the past now are enforced and have to do this because Ofsted is assessing it more and more frequently. So we welcome that initiative. A couple of years ago, back in 2015, the Department of Education has established an organization called the Careers and Enterprise Company, trying to support schools by providing funding to organizations like Form the Future to help the education system and schools to bring businesses on board and help with modern, I would call it the modern careers education. So you could think, great, so where's the problem? Just our last funding round, when Form the Future went for funding, they actually said they had 37 times the demand of organizations to support schools in this country than the funding available for them to distribute. They actually focus on particular areas where deprivation is biggest, which is good, but that means areas where where they don't have that extent of deprivation and lack of social mobility, they fall short. And schools don't have the potential to access that funding in order to help them get a careers program ready to prepare their young people. So it is not a sustainable solution. And the Careers and Enterprise Company ultimately is dependent on government and on government direction. So at the moment, they are funded. At the moment, they have the funds available to support that. But what happens if government changes? What happens if the priorities change? Careers and Enterprise Company, as fast as it came, it can vanish. So all that support, the millions which are put into the country to help schools to deliver this, may vanish from one day to the other. So what is our role in order to make that sustainable? That brings us nicely to the topic of funding. So schools in the UK have been chronically underfunded. You could say, well, that's true. But looking at the news lately, they've just announced that they will really they are planning to put £400 million into the UK, particularly for sixth form colleges and further education schools in order to help them with technical skills. They introduced the T levels because they believe that T levels will help us to implement better entry routes into technical jobs. They will enforce work experience as part of the curriculum alongside in-school training to really equip young people with those skills. But that's 400 million for sixth forms and further education. It is an alternative pathway yet to apprenticeships. There's a big question mark out there. What is the difference between the apprenticeships route and the T levels, and why do we have T levels now, and where's the benefit, and which students should actually go in what direction? And actually, to the point, yes, we're in the trialing phase, but even schools are quite unclear about all these different venues. And you think 400 million, that sounds great, but is that enough? Will that solve our problem? And that only deals with those students aged 16 and above. So who's actually preparing our young people from 11 to 16? So you could say, great, the BFE at the moment is actually undertaking a consultation to find out and to work out a formula, how can they best do the per pupil funding going forward for young people aged 5 to 16. So you think, great, they're thinking about that, tick the box, funding sorted. But there is something called the LEC funding problem. Because the schools always get funding for their students as of the student numbers from the previous year. So even if they would now input more funding for schools as we are today and close some of the gap we've had over the last couple of years in terms of school funding and per head funding, we will always only get funding for the number of students they've had in the previous year. In our economic growth area, where school numbers go up every year, there will always be a funding problem for these individual schools going forward. So what's the role of businesses to help the education system to close the gap? And not only close the funding gap, but close the funding gap, close the skills gap. What is our role in supporting this? Is it really only the ask of the education system? Can we really lie back and think, is there a problem? Do they actually ever have the chance to catch up with the speed within which business develops? The education system is an enormous organization per se. Do they have the ability to follow, and do they have the ability to catch up? Or is there a role for us from a professional point of view? And is there a role for the community to actually take a responsibility and then take a role in helping to prepare that next generation and helping the education system to get it right? But does it end here? So you can think, oh, that's all young people, fine. Yeah, we have to do something about it, but is that it? Or does that not go further? What about our workforce? When we run organizations, what is our responsibility for our workforce? We have an ever-changing workforce. When we get young people, and I mean, one of the reasons, organizations say, well, there's a massive skills gap, is because we don't get the skills coming through at the moment. So what that actually means, when we bring them on board, we actually then have to deal with that skills gap. We have to deal with the generation changes and the changes of the value systems. We have to work with Generation Y, and we have to work with Generation Z, and they have totally different values to the values we have. Are we actually ready to work with that? When we talk to businesses, and I've been, we are working with more than 1,000 businesses in the area, and the one thing you hear is, staff retention. You get them on board, but then, and actually now we are taking more the adult apprentices because to some point, we cannot retain young people onboarding. What about the job changers? What about those who decide, I want to have a career change? How can we support them? How do you support them when they change their role? Do you have something on in-house which may offer peer-to-peer mentoring? Can you help at whatever age you onboard people to better onboard and feel party to your organization? Identify with your values, understand what you're looking for. Have you ever thought about a buddy system? Funnily enough, primary schools have that. When you get a primary reception year coming in, the year 6 is actually going to be their buddy. Every single year 6 student will have a primary student to actually help them find their way around, feel comfortable, and even if it's as simple as finding the toilets. But you know, they really have the responsibility making sure that in the playground they're not lost, that they have somebody they can rely on and asking. Why should this only work for primary schools? Why should that not be an option for bringing young people on board into the workforce? Why not offering them a platform to actually connect with each other? Because sometimes being the newbie, not having any idea about the new organization, and that doesn't mean you have to be 16, 18 or 25. It could equally be when you're 35. It's actually quite nice to have somebody at hand to say, well, can I just share this? If I realize I have an issue with my time management, it is really nice to know that I could reach out to somebody internally who's not my supervisor to get some tips and tricks. I have to do my first big speech. Oh my God, when I did my first speech, I was so nervous. I'm getting better now, but I had people along the way to say, well, you know, why don't you do this? You could try this. It's nice. We all learn from each other. So is there not a role for you as an organization or as an individual within an organization to think about how can I support that skill growth and that sense of belonging within my organization to help retain and actually to help motivate and make people feel better? And with these thoughts, I will leave you and I will hand over.